I left Zimbabwe in 2005, and I didn't get to go back home until like 2012. So it took me about 7 years before I went back home. So the whole time I was in college, I never went back home because I just didn't have the money to do that. When I went back home 7 years later, my friends, or quote unquote, the friends who used to tell me like, hey, what you're trying to do is impossible, you're crazy, don't do it. I went back and they were sitting at the same stoop doing the same things that I left them 7 years ago doing. The only difference that had happened was that they had just become older. So dream big and be bold enough to take action to achieve those dreams. Because if you don't take action, you will be at the same stoop doing the same thing 7, 10, 15 years from now. So that would be the piece of advice I would share.
First task any entrepreneur has to have is to create the vision, to think about what is the purpose of the business, how we communicate it, and to spread it. So to be the advocate for it. And you know, a lot of, in the early stages, it's one-on-one conversations with a buyer or a partner or an investor or the first employees. But then as you grow the business, it's just that same conversation with more folks. And then it's attracting and raising the resources to grow the business, to make sure the team has the tools to deploy. And so usually that's money. And of course, with Honest Tea, starting early, it was raising $25,000 at a time, which was a lot of conversations where I probably succeeded in 1 out of 10 conversations, I'd get a check written. And then of course, with Beyond Meat, we raised much larger sums, but it really was the same conversations, maybe different investors, but that same discipline.
Another way you can become more resilient is to do, kind of mind training, sometimes called mindfulness, like focusing on your breath, watching the full in breath and the full out breath. And when your mind wanders off, bring it back to the breath. The key here is when you notice your mind wandered and you bring it back. That's like when you go to the gym and every time you lift a weight, you make that muscle with every rep, you make it a little stronger. Every time you bring your mind back, you are making the neural circuitry for focus that much stronger. But there's a twofer. It turns out that the same neural circuitry that helps you concentrate on your breath is a circuitry that helps you calm down when you're overly upset. So what this means is eventually it's a dose response. The more you do it, the better the effect. But eventually you get triggered less often. If you do, you get triggered less strongly, and then you recover more quickly, which is the definition, as I said, of resilience.
What's your enemy? If you don't know what you're for, start with what you're against, because that's the springboard you're pushing against. So what's your enemy? What's that thing that pisses you off so royally you talk about it too much, that it gets you out of bed in the morning, when you're lying in bed with your partner or significant other and you won't shut up about it, when you're at a dinner party and you've had 2 or 3 glasses of wine too many and it's like, oh, for God's sake, shut up. He's always talking about blah, blah. What is that thing? What's your enemy? Secondly, what are you the only of? There's only one of you in the world. The journey you've been on, where you came from, parents, nurture, nature, all that good stuff. And then when you're at your best, what are you doing? When you're at your best, what are you doing? And if you start to answer these types of questions, you can start to go, hey, this is what I care about. This is where I'm best equipped to play a role. This type of impact would be most meaningful to me. And again, you push in on that language and push in on the language and write it down and write it down. And the way it worked for me was I started writing blog posts back when blogging was new in 2008 or 2009. And then I started to notice themes. You'd write about anything for the first month or so, and then you'd be like, well, I wrote about this. Oh, I know. So get out of your own way, interrogate yourself with some questions, observe the results, really push the language, and then see how far you can distill it down. And if you really are authentic about that process, I think something will emerge that you can leverage for sure, effectively, to have impact and have a business and be a brand if you want to be.